loose conversational show, a lot like yours. We just talk about whatever suits our fancy with these films, and just a very loose atmosphere.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm going to get some stuff ready here, and I'm going to tweet this out so people are aware. I know some people wanted a link. Is there anything else you would like to plug? I know you have the Trek show. Is there anything else?
That's like really the only thing I've got going right now.
Okay, cool.
Like, I really need to. I've got like a portfolio site, but it's like 3 years out of date, so I really need to redo that.
Cool. All right, then we'll just direct
my
people
art.
to the podcast and your Twitter then.
Yeah.
How long is this show going to take you? Like, that was one thing I wanted to ask you, and I might ask you on the show as well. But like, I got to be entirely honest. I've seen a couple episodes of Star Trek, and I've seen the newer J.J. Abrams movies, which I know aren't really like. I know they're different, and I get that.
Yeah.
So I am very foreign to Star Trek in most ways. Isn't there a shit ton of Star Trek? Like,
Yeah. Like, the original series goes on for 3 seasons. We just finished season 1 after about, like, 6 months.
oh my gosh.
Part of it is because we're doing it at the rate of 1 a week.
Uh-huh.
But so there's 3 seasons of that. There's, like, a season of the animated series. There's, I think, like, 8 seasons of Next Generation.
Oh my gosh.
And a similar number of seasons of Deep Space Nine. Then there's like 6 or 7 seasons of Voyager.
And then come next year, you're going to start getting the new show.
Yeah, the Brian Fuller show is going to come out. I think we're going to end up doing like 2 episodes a week when that comes out, and like while that's in season, like we'll do an episode on the current show and then go back to the vintage Trek.
That's cool. I love that. And I love that because I think one of the best things a podcaster can do is create something that has a sense of regularity and forces you to be regular with it. And when you say like, we're going to do a show once a week and we're going to keep, pulling our way through this entire franchise, basically, that forces you to get up and podcast, which is something we all need.
Right. For sure.
I love that. So we have a show on our network that's called Exploring the X-Files. And they're doing exactly the same thing. They're going through every single episode of the X-Files weekly. I know they're on a hiatus right now, but like that was definitely that's not even as big of a commitment. That's only like 10 seasons.
Right. Which is still a
really
huge commitment, but
oh yeah, huge commitment. But that'll be really cool. All right, we are live right now, so I'm gonna put the chat room on the side. The reason we're doing the show live essentially is Labyrinth has been a running joke on the program since day one, basically, mostly just because of
Whose fault is that?
my complete love and adoration of Labyrinth. I love it. So that's definitely been a running joke, and we've had some people who wanted to come in and see this live, and we never do live shows, so we figured like we'll do a one-off kind of special live show for anyone who does want to hop in. And so yeah, it'll just be the same as any other show, and
sure.
And it should be very interesting. And you got to watch Labyrinth this week?
I did, yeah.
Great.
I wanted to like watch it like twice through, but I only had time for it once, so.
That's totally good. Yeah, and I so appreciate you coming in on short notice. We had a guest book for this originally, and they had a death in the family earlier in the week, and they said, "Hey, we just can't do the show." And that's when I hopped on the podcasting subreddit, and so many people responded, which I was not prepared for. And then I saw yours, and I'm like, "Oh, there's actually a show that ties in really well, kind of what we do." So I was really excited to get you on, and I'll probably go back on that subreddit and start messaging all the other people that responded.
Sure.
But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on short notice.
Yeah, of course.
That subreddit is really... Did I talk to you on podcasting or podcasts? Because I put it on both.
It was podcasting, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, that's a really good subreddit. People are very helpful with one another on that one, more so than podcasts, because it is the act of podcasting on the podcasting subreddit. So it's less people who like podcasts and more people who do it.
Yeah, verbs rather than nouns.
Yep. All right, David said his computer has crashed and he is loading it up right now. Okay, that's
Nice.
fine.
Okay.
We're not going live for another well, we're live right now, but we're not starting for another 5 minutes.
Sure.
I'm going to send you a link here to our document in case you'd like to follow along. It just has kind of a basic, like, outline.
Okay.
I will put it in our chat. All right, there you go. So I saw on your Twitter you're in Chicago.
I am, yeah.
Nice, I am as well.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm living off the Blue Line for the past, like, almost a decade.
Oh, very cool. I'm right off the Red Line.
Okay, yeah, the other 24-hour train line.
Yeah. Yeah. Love the city.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, when I was a little kid, I grew up downstate, but we came up here on weekends sometimes. And there was apparently one time when we'd been like walking around for like 6 hours, and I was like 5 or 6 and like miserable and like upset, and like my feet had blisters because we'd been walking so long. But then I like turned to my mom and I was like, I'm gonna live here. And she was just like, what are you talking about? And then, like years later, I moved up here. So
that was a good decision. I love the city. I came from, suburbia in Colorado and came up here for school.
oh wow.
And it is a refreshing change as someone who is a musician and loves the arts and wants to always go to a concert every weekend and stuff. You don't get that in Aurora, Colorado, but you do get that in Chicago, which is great. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic city, just all around.
Oh yeah. Hey David, how you doing?
Good. I'm trying to make my setup a little more camera friendly.
It's okay. Oh yeah, you have to actually show your face tonight.
I know.
Oh, right. That reminds me. How does it? Okay, it's not bad. My messy bookshelf and my closet doors.
Oh, you're fine.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we were going to be live or not, and I'm glad I decided to wear like real clothes instead of just going straight pajamas.
It wouldn't matter
But you don't
either
need
way.
pants.
But
I'll go pants if you want. Just in solidarity.
Is that why everyone? That's why I started podcasting. I don't know about everyone else.
Because it was something you could do without your pants.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right then.
The setup is weird.
Make sure.
It's a wardrobe for radio.
Exactly.
Okay.
One more page.
I need to throw the link up.
Oh no, I have 2 more pages. Shite. Okay.
All right. I'm gonna tweet everything out right now, and then we'll get started here in another minute or two.
Yeah, I need to throw the link up on Facebook.
Yeah, we have I believe we're live right now. I'm just loading up the live thing right now so I can see the chat and so I can. Cool. Okay, we are live now. I'm gonna put a link to us live here in our chat so you guys
All
have
right,
it.
I'm going to kill my mic for a minute so you don't hear me typing.
That's all good.
Okie dokie. So we're not doing a Zencaster tonight, I'm guessing?
No, because there's no way for me to do it live and in Zencaster, unfortunately.
That's what I thought.
Because with Zencaster, we have to mute our audio in Hangouts, which means people can hear us. So that's a bummer, but I do have it. I'm not going to use the audio people are getting live. I'm going to use audio that I'm recording locally. Okay. So we'll still get the same quality we've had on every other show that we haven't done with Zencaster.
Going back.
So, yep, going back. By the way, we figured out, we had already ended the show last night, David, but Zencaster has a setting that literally just lets Nicole or anyone else just download their local file, which is so nice.
Neat.
All right, I'm going to put this in the Blazing Caribou chat. And the announcement chat. This is an announcement.
It's a pretty big deal.
It's like an announcement.
All right.
Yeah, my dog is going to be tapping around in the background all night, so.
That is okay. We have had shows.
Mine barks occasionally.
Where David's barks, where Nicole's cat just kind of like slithers off in the background. Okay. Hello, couple people in the show right now. How you doing?
Yay.
Okay. We'll get started here in a moment, everybody. We're just getting everything ready, notifying the masses. So like all 4, 5, 7, 10 people that want to get in. That's probably being generous. Can get in. All right. Cool. All right. Do you have any questions about the show, Chelsea? Anything at all?
I don't think so.
Cool. All right. And don't worry about any sort of like language or anything like that. Anything that doesn't pass in the filter on iTunes, I'll just beep. So.
Okay, great.
I know some people ask about that. All right.
So be as blue as you want. Don't be as blue as you want.
Just speaking nothing but swear words all night.
This foreign movie.
Okay, Duncan Jones tweeted a minute ago. I'm gonna tweet him. I'm gonna be like, "Hey, we're talking about your dad. Come join us." I have had 2 interactions on Twitter with Duncan Jones, and they're like my Twitter claim to fame because the only time I've ever had tweets blow up was when Duncan Jones retweeted me. I was so happy for like 10 minutes, and then I realized that having people retweeting you all the time must be awful. It's fun for like 10 minutes.
And then it's like, what is notifications? Please no.
Yeah, I'm like, no, I want to go back to like these 6-7 people who actually care what I have to say, not telling me anything, just reading me.
I'll like tweet to comic artists all the time, and they're like, you know, they don't have huge followings, so they'll like notice when they get mentioned and like tweet back. I'm like, oh man, no, I
famous.
If they're Dan Slott, they'll block you. He's not an artist, but
I don't give a shit about Dan Slott.
Oh my gosh, I have to ask you. I have to ask you, Chelsea. Yoko Ono is following you on Twitter.
I don't know why.
Great
Are you
question.
aware of this?
That's not even my question.
I'm aware of this. I have literally no idea why. She's never interacted with me.
I was like, that's awesome. I want Yoko Ono to follow me on Twitter. That's great. You should send her a message. You should follow her so you can send her a message.
I'm following her. Like, I followed back. I just don't know what happened.
Oh my gosh. You should just send Yoko a message and be like, sup, Yoko.
Yeah, just like hit her up, like slide into the DMs, like, hey.
Yeah, I've been listening to Season of Glass, been thinking about you a lot lately. And I like Yoko Ono. I think she's such a peculiar person. She's very interesting. She actually has an exhibit right now at MoMA or at some other really big place. Like she actually does art outside of just screaming into a mic.
Yeah, no, she did a lot of like experimental art back in the day, and I know she still does a fair bit of it.
Yeah, she's really interesting. And I always, as a really big Beatles fan, I always get a little annoyed when people are like, Yoko Ono broke up the Beatles. I'm like, no, the Beatles broke up the Beatles. She doesn't
for a way out.
So, all right, everybody, are we good to go?
Yeah, am I sounding okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay.
Almost. Give me like 1 more minute. I got literally one more sentence.
Okay, cool. Okay. I like how much you type up for these, Nicole, because what you do is you go out and write all of these things, and it's so articulate and well thought out. And I text myself.
I write it down.
Yes. I text myself things as watching the movie. All right. Hello, everyone. All 3 of you are the best.
We love you, Dad.
Thanks, Mom.
No joke, I'm pretty sure one of those is my mom.
I'm
just throw that out there. Hey, Mom.
She's one of our biggest fans. Hi, Brett's mom.
Yeah, my mom loves our show. She listens on her commute to work, and then I get calls, and she's like, I need to watch, and then blank, whatever the movie is.
I was so upset that Labyrinth was not on Netflix anymore.
Really?
I know. Oh, my God.
That was so disappointing.
I had to pay for it. Ugh.
It like got taken off in like December last year, apparently.
Really? Has it? No, it was on there more recently.
How long? I thought it was back for a while this year.
It might have been back for a while.
Okay, I got all my notes typed up. Yay!
All right, we're all good. I'm gonna go ahead, take a look at the chat room, make sure I can see it. All right, great, I can see it. Okay, everybody, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get started with this special episode of Geek Cinema Society. We're gonna roll one more time. I just want to get quick levels from each of you. Make sure you're all sounding nice and purty. Nicole, how was your day today? How you doing?
As busy as hell as usual, so
All right,
not
very
anything
good.
new there.
Very good. What about you, David?
It's just been nonstop at this point.
All right, I kicked your levels up a little bit right there. And Chelsea, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I have very few complaints.
All right on. All right, I got levels from everybody. I'm not your mom, but cool. Someone that's not my mom is here.
What?
Yay!
Yay!
And Nature Dumbaroo. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started, everybody.
Is that their screen name, not Brett's mom?
I would be concerned if my mom was Major Dumbaroo, just because I don't know where she would think of that.
Well, maybe Buckaroos from the whole Tadpool shindig.
Oh, right on. Hello, Tadpool people. All right, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started. I'm just going to load up our soundboard right here. Quick message at the top of the program. We do spoil each week's film. If you have not yet seen Labyrinth, you might want to go ahead and stop watching, except you shouldn't because there's only like 3 or 4 of you, so you should probably just stick around either way. But if you have a penchant for not wanting things to be spoiled, you may want to bow out, especially if you're listening on the audio feed when this comes out in a couple weeks. So just want to give everyone that warning. We're going to go ahead and get started with the show. I have David Bowie playing on our soundboard. Hold on.
Try it again.
We could
The
start
joys
with
of
the
being
show with
live.
Moon Age Daydream, but I'm pretty sure we'd get a copyright strike.
Yeah, that would be bad.
All right, let's get going.
It's fun to stay at the DMCA.
This is the beauty of live podcasting, is everyone gets to watch all of this.
That's the fumbling around.
Oh yeah, all the fumbling around, because I need to restart. Hey, you guys should talk about something really interesting for the next minute.
It's so much fun.
Oh, well, I'm reading right here that the production designer wrote that Jareth's wardrobe was partly inspired by the romantic figures of Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights and Rochester from Jane Eyre.
What about his crotch? What was that inspired by?
I'm pretty sure that's
We're gonna
most
go right now.
Bowie.
If this working.
This show is produced in conjunction with Blazing Caribou Studios. You can check out this and other cool podcasts in the Blazing Caribou family by heading over to blazingcariboustudios.com. If you like the show, consider becoming a Patreon and donating because BCS is funded solely by listeners like you. Special thanks to Alpha Geek Media and Diamond Club for their continued support. And as always, thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Brett Stewart.
I'm Nicole Davis.
And I'm David Luzader.
And you're listening to the Geek Cinema Society. Hello, everybody. My name is indeed Brett Stewart. You are listening to the Geek Cinema Society, the show where each week we delve deep into a film that is considered pivotal to geek culture. And when we started this program, we reached out to you, the listeners, to help us determine and rank those films. Our guest, however, is seeing this week's film for the very first time. I should preface the top of the show with the fact that we are doing this live. This is a very special episode. We only do live episodes once in a blue moon, but it is Labyrinth. It is David Bowie's crotch, and that belongs on live podcasting, and always will be. Our guest this week is Chelsea Anderson from the Long Trek Home podcast, a show that has made it their mission to watch and discuss every episode of Star Trek ever made, even the animated series. She can be found on Twitter at @AFlightyBroad. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. You should definitely follow her if you want some dumb jokes, some politics, and updates on her podcast. Chelsea, thanks so much for being with us. We so appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah, we're happy you're here. You are effectively our guinea pig for going live, and you're doing it short notice, so I can't tell you how much that is appreciated. Lots of bonus points for that. And you had never seen this week's film, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. Very special film, very dear to my heart. But first, I do want to introduce my two co-hosts. Nicole Davis, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Brett. How are you this evening?
I am doing exceedingly well. I spent the last 2 hours watching stuff related to this movie and this movie. David, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I've been doing nonstop podcasts for like 4 days now. So let's do this. Let's keep the train going.
Yeah, keep the train going. This is 2 days of Geek Cinema Society because we did do a show yesterday, which will be previously on the feed because we did. What did we do yesterday? What movie did we watch this week, guys?
We recorded Predator yesterday.
We did Predator. That's right. That was fun. You should check that out on the feed.
Couldn't really have a bigger contrast.
Exactly. All right. You should talk about David Bowie's codpiece. Yeah, we're going to. We're going to, Katie. It's great to have a chat room for once. I love it. All right. This film, if you have not already assumed based on our previous discussions of this film, it's 1986's Labyrinth. Young Sarah. Yeah. Played by Jennifer Connelly. 14-year-old Jennifer Connelly is
15.
left home alone by her parents when she has to babysit her little brother, Toby. When the baby keeps crying, she tells a story to make him sleep, inadvertently conjuring the Goblin King Jareth, famously played by David Bowie, from a fantasy world to steal the child and bring him into his castle in the center of a labyrinth. Sarah has to rescue him before midnight, or else her young brother will become a goblin. This is a film, of course, we have alluded to numerous times on the show, or I have, because I love this movie. But in seriousness, it was ranked 21 out of 500 on our list. It is something that is pretty, it is a staple of 1980s geek culture in many ways. Why is that, Nicole? What makes this film so enduring, and why is it significant?
Partly because Jim Henson shows you how world building is done when all you have are, when your movie is 95% indoor sets and like 5% second unit work. It's a beautifully done fantasy. It holds up very well, even 30 years later. Jennifer Connelly had practically the definition of fresh-faced beauty that launched 1,000 fancies, I would say. David Bowie had a darker allure that launched 1,000 yearnings to go find a bad guy to reform. Bowie's performance helped influence future fantasy villains with sort of the push-pull of villain but wanting the hero to like him kind of thing. It was an inspiration for some later films like Mirror Mask, written by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean. And there may have been some inspiration. They were certainly jointly inspired by Escher, but the sequence, particularly in the Escher room, may have been an inspiration for the sequence in Inception, where they do the Penrose steps.
Wow, I never actually would have drawn that parallel. I'm glad you did. That's great.
A lot of bias going into her summary there.
Low
Shush.
You do your own summary.
Okay, so
That's my job.
this film is something that you had never seen before, Chelsea, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, so broadly, before we start digging into the nitty-gritty David Bowie crotch-tastic extravaganza, did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? What do you feel about this film?
I think overall, yeah, I did enjoy it. I'd been kind of almost worried about whether or not I would, just because it's a movie that, like, has so much hype built up around it, and when you've got a movie that, like, you somehow missed out on that everyone else saw in their youth and as a child, and you're sort of like the odd one out, like, yeah, I never saw Labyrinth. It's sort of like, is this actually going to be good? And then, yeah, like, it was a really fun movie. It's got, like, a few sort of, like, weird and vaguely weak points, but I think overall, yeah, it really held up, even as, like, a first viewing for an adult 30 years later.
That's great. Yeah, I think this film is one of those films from the 80s that was initially sort of directed towards a younger audience that can be appreciated as an adult, perhaps because of Bowie. I think Bowie is arguably one of the things that makes the film as enduring as it is, because adults love David Bowie. But he is an enigmatic character in this film. I do want to talk about Jennifer Connelly first, though, because she was, I said 14 in the intro, but Nicole, she was 15?
15, yeah.
Okay,
She
she was
14 when she
in the intro.
auditioned.
Oh, okay. Because I was watching the bonus features on the 30th anniversary of Labyrinth. It just came out. If this movie is something crotch-tastic, can I call Brett that now? No. This is why I love a live chat. But anyway, David Bowie... No, I'm talking about Jennifer Connelly. Jennifer Connelly, when she auditioned, David Bowie went on camera and started talking about her, and this is in that 30th anniversary cut. And he starts talking about how this is the most eloquent, young person I could have worked with on this film. She is so professional, and he really spoke highly of her. And if anyone has a penchant for this film in any capacity, it's worth going out and grabbing that cut, because they jam-packed it with special features that I'll talk about later on the program that have never before been seen, and a lot of them were recently recorded. So, David, how do you feel about Jennifer Connelly's performance in this film? How do you feel about her character arc?
So, her performance in this film, I don't want to disparage. She had to carry a lot of this film as the human character, and does a fine job in that respect, given what she had to work with. So I did put into the show notes there, like, what is her character arc? Because that is a legitimate question. What is her character arc? She doesn't really have one. This movie wants to present itself as a coming-of-age tale, but I think it's very weak in that respect. I think this movie, honestly, doesn't have a lot going on. It has a very loose plot, and then we're kind of strung along from set piece to set piece, which they are fun set pieces. They are very fine, but I didn't find a lot for me to really latch onto into the story character-wise. I'm largely playing the devil's advocate to Brett's super fanboy in this episode.
That's good. I want you to do that.
Partially my goal here. But her character is uninteresting and frankly annoying in the beginning.
Yes.
Well, in the beginning, yes. She's incredibly annoying.
And I don't know. I didn't feel anything for her at any point, really, in the film, even getting towards the end.
We got Margot in chat. My first experience with this movie was as a 7th grader, and unfortunately, all I remember is David Bowie in tights. They're very tight. I don't blame you.
How is that unfortunate?
It's not an unfortunate. Yeah.
It's not unfortunate. But in any case, I would wholly agree with that. And in fact, one thing I've always found interesting about Jennifer Connelly at the beginning of this film, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this, is that she seems to have a really great life, and her stepmom seems to genuinely care about her. Yes. And she's like, hey, please go out on a date, have fun. And Jennifer Connelly's like, no, I just want to play with Felix or whatever its name is in my room. And then she starts complaining that her even stepmother is keeping her inside watching the child. Like, no, she's not.
And there's
she
even
wants you to go out on a date.
Is there anything else you're going to do tonight? No. Why do you?
But it's but you didn't ask. Which honestly, to me, with my past as a stroppy teen girl, which is the distant past now, but that was actually kind of relatable to me, not necessarily even just in my own experience, but other girls that I knew. It felt like I don't know. I didn't even find her that annoying in the beginning. It was she was being kind of ridiculous and kind of whiny, but it was also but that's sort of what teens are and do.
Well, yeah, I mean, she certainly got the self-centeredness down. It's this is her whole world. Anything that takes her away from what she wants to be doing and the fantasies she wants to indulge in is an imposition on her.
I think the funny thing is that you would think that a logical character arc for her would be to go from, I'm locked inside, I don't have any friends, I just want to read my book and be in this imaginary world. A logical character arc for her would be to start to overcome that and maybe find some real friends and maybe find some solace outside of that magical world. But what I've always found interesting about the film is that does not happen at all. At the film, they just concrete her indulgence in her fantasy world, so much so that as soon as she leaves it, they're like,
Wait.
no, we'll always be.
And
No,
and she's latching
I
more
disagree.
onto the fantasy world than
No,
anything.
I disagree.
Okay, let me. What do you think?
I think that she does have a character arc, that she reaches a kind of maturity by the end of the movie. You know, along the way, she learns the importance of responsibility. She learns that life isn't always fair, and sometimes that's just how it is.
That's very fair.
Yeah. And she learns that you need to persevere to reach your goals. You can't just give up partway through because it's hard or it's annoying or you're tired. You know, and these are things that these are life skills you need to have as an adult.
And that's all fine, but we get no sense of her character before. I never got the sense that she was getting ready to leave her baby brother behind. She was always on this mission to rescue her baby brother from the very beginning. We got barely any context of her before the movie began, and maybe it's just like, yeah, we didn't get a good feel for her character, so there's not really much of an arc. I didn't feel any. I mean, what you're saying, like that sounds fine, but for me, I didn't get any of that from this movie at all. I didn't get her maturing or taking responsibility. If she was like, you know, for 5 minutes of the film, was like, I don't care about my brother, go ahead, take him, whatever. And then like maybe throughout the film, she was like, oh, I'm not going to go through the labyrinth. That's hard work. And someone like talked her into it. But she was always like, I've got to get my brother back. Like she...
Not necessarily. There are, I think, Nicole is right, and in fact, someone in the chat, Nicole's correct, and you're correct that Nicole is correct, I think. But in any case, I think Nicole is right in the fact that there are multiple times where she like literally she's like, it's not fair, and you know, starts waving her hands around, and then you know when Bowie changes the time on her, Jareth, Bowie,
Right.
same person, and when she initially gets into the labyrinth and starts realizing that things are not as they seem and the deck is stacked against her, and you know, her own little drawings on the floor are now being reversed, and all these things start happening to her, and she does try to throw in the towel a couple times, and she does have to learn to persevere through that, and continually throughout the film she is saying that you know, this is not fair, and throughout the entire film. And Bowie continues to make that not fair for her. And he continues to stack the deck against her. So she does grow in that regard. I think, Nicole, that's a astute observation.
Well, and I think at the end, it's just the reference she makes to saying every now and again, for no reason at all, I will need you. It's, you know, for every adults will always need the occasional indulgence in fantasy or childish pastimes to just give yourself a break, you know, a reward, a relax from the responsibilities of life, because you just can't be on and serious and responsible and, you know, working 100% of the time. And I mean, there are some people who have to do that for certain periods of time, and it's so wearing. You know, so I think that she's right at the end of the movie that occasionally, yes, she's going to need them. She's going to need the fantasy, but she's learning to live outside of it and to, you know, be a responsible person.
Definitely. And
Got way more out of this movie than I did, apparently.
That's
You're
okay.
a lot more subtext than I thought was there.
Chelsea,
I don't know.
as a first time watcher, rather, are
I
you?
listened to the movie too.
You did listen to the movie. I don't know. I think I might have just muted you, David. Sorry about that.
I muted myself, so it worked.
David, you don't like Labyrinth. You're out. But in any
You
case,
can't just silence your opponents that way, Brett.
as a first-time watcher, you mentioned you didn't find her quite as annoying in the beginning. Do you feel, as a 15-year-old actress, she held her own through this movie well enough, or even like good? I mean,
Yeah, I think she did a pretty good job of it. I think, was it David who was mentioning that she was mostly like playing off of like puppets and indoor sets and stuff? I feel like the fact that she was working with actual puppets that were there on set with her probably helped that a lot. Because in contrast to like early CGI movies, especially, like once we started getting into CGI, you would see actors like thrown in and they're acting literally in like an empty room. So I think she was helped out a lot by having those actual like scenes and puppets around her. So she did have something to really interact with. It wasn't just a tennis ball.
Sure. That's actually, when you look at some of the special features of the kid who was acting in The Jungle Book, this year, that is a different type of acting because he is acting to an empty room. And she definitely had things around her. That's a very good point. I want to read a couple things here from the chat room because we have a chat room. We never have them. My 11-year-old wanted to turn the movie off after she was yelling at Toby in the beginning. This is a terrible movie. She's so mean to that poor baby. He's going to die. This is the same movie who just sent to bed early for being mean to his baby brother. Yes. I love it. Followed up by, can you successfully cosplay as Jareth if you don't purchase the largest Idaho potato that money can buy? Discuss. I don't think so.
It was distracting. Like, David Bowie's crotch was.
Let's talk about David Bowie's crotch. That's
was distracting.
It's the elephant in the room, so to speak.
Great.
We did talk about David Bowie, or not David Bowie, Jennifer Connelly. What do people think of David Bowie's character in this film? He doesn't have a big acting resume, but this, I think, is one of the big things that everyone knows him from.
Sure. David Bowie is a classically trained actor and had played previous roles. He played the Elephant Man and all sorts of other different things. And I think he holds himself very, very well in this film. And when I was watching all of these, special features, I think aside from the fact that a lot of these interviews were recorded after he died, and there's always tends to be, we tend to, have people who have passed away in a higher light. But a lot of these people did say this movie could not have happened without David Bowie. He was the heart and soul of this movie. He went in and recorded all these songs for us, read the script, loved it, and they said David Bowie is one of the only people who can be in this film because he's a good actor, he can write versatile music, and he is someone who can play a character that is a parody of the most extreme version of himself. And that was something that they acknowledged that Bowie was humble enough to do. And I think he is such a lovable character in this film as Jareth. My understanding is that he would go as far to stay on set all day, go out to beers with the staff afterward. He was so involved in this, and it was cathartic for him in many ways because after being on the road and having so much go on in his life for decades, for many people going and working on a movie set all day can be stressful, but for him it was cathartic. It was particularly wonderful for him. Mm-hmm. And I think that shows because I think he resonates just joy and power and prowess in his performance as Jareth because you just believe he's Jareth. And I was telling Nicole this before the show, but I was on a show called The Podcasting Couch a couple weeks ago, and that host and I were talking about David Bowie. And David Bowie is one of those people who changes. So everyone has their own Bowie, right? So my David Bowie, the first David Bowie that I was introduced to was Ziggy Stardust. So that will always be my quintessential Bowie. And this guy said the first Bowie I was introduced to, I had never listened to his music, was Jareth, the Goblin King. And Bowie will always be Jareth, the Goblin King to me. And that is like poignant to me and almost like tugs at my heartstrings a little bit because this is a portrayal that hones in on a very specific era and period and moment in a legend's life. And I don't think you get that a lot.
No, that's true. My David Bowie was the Let's Dance era David Bowie. That's where I was first introduced to his music.
Right.
And I was not appreciative at the time of the quality of his music. Nice. Let's just put it that way. But I mean, I really love excuse me. I love his performance here. He's the ultimate sort of insecure villain. He acts as he's both very assured and yet petulant at the same time. He needs to be needed and feared and adored in order to feel like he's truly a ruler. And he's acting as sort of both he plays multiple roles to Sarah. He's kind of like a suitor and a villain and almost a mentoring figure. You know, he's trying to teach her things about life.
And there's a pedophile vibe that was introduced in our chat just now. And by the way, come on, chat room. You guys are talking about David Bowie, the pedophile. You guys are talking about dancing in the street. Don't corrupt us with dancing in the street.
Here's my question about this David Bowie Goblin King. Why did he care so much what Jennifer Connelly's character thought about him?
Because he's insecure. He needs to be adored and feared.
Why was he a human when all the other goblins were goblins? Not a very important point, but I want to ask.
He's a goblin king. He is a goblin king, not necessarily a king that's a goblin.
So.
Just silence.
No, it wasn't even like a main point for me. I just thought that was amusing.
Yeah.
Well, you saw his like eyebrow and like eye makeup. He was clearly a goblin.
You're right. The eye makeup.
The pointy eyebrows just did it.
Yeah. No, of course. Like that's how that works.
When David Bowie that's currently in Japan right now. If you're a Japanese listener, you should go and check that out. But it's a whole exhibit on everything David Bowie did in his life. And when it came to the U.S., they put it in Chicago. And they had a whole section devoted to Labyrinth. And they had all of the original attire and the orbs and the cane and stuff, the riding crop for some reason, as Nicole was talking about in the pre-show. Yep. And it's a fascinating getup. It is very much David Bowie.
I'd always heard that he never did the crystal balls himself. That was like someone else's arms.
That was a I don't know if you'd call him a puppeteer, but a guy who did like contact juggling, where the ball never leaves your hand. So it was a guy named Michael Moschen who did all the the crystal twirling.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love the crystal twirling. It's so cool. So let's talk a little bit about. I want to talk about the music of Labyrinth. I think that is a very fundamental part of it, because Bowie went in and wrote an entire album for this. In fact, there is music on that album that really doesn't get utilized in the film a lot. Was this film effective for you musically, Chelsea? Is this something that you enjoyed with its music? Is it something that felt cliche or cheesy, or what were your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's David Bowie. Of course the music was good. No, but for real though, I really liked the Dance Magic Dance song, and I wasn't actually expecting them to launch into that when it happened. Yeah. Because I think that's the one that comes right after that little rhyme about, like, you remind me of the babe, which is also one of those things that's quoted so constantly. And it's like, I knew it was from Labyrinth, but it was also like the sort of moment of like, oh, right, okay, that's the actual context for this line, that like people just sort of bandy that about and will launch into that with one another. And I'm just like, oh, okay. And I'm like, okay, I've seen it in context. I still think people doing it is a little weird, but fine, have fun. But yeah, like I didn't know that launched straight into a song.
Yes.
So I loved that.
Yeah, I would love to. That's a great recording. I think one of the songs I think is actually particularly beautiful in it. There's two of them I think are really well done. The first is "As the World Falls Down." I think that's a really pretty song, and I think it's a great Bowie song. Because one thing I should say, my bias for Bowie in this film aside, I do think that Labyrinth holds up well within his 80s catalog. I think it aligns really well within that Dance Magic Dance period, or rather the Let's Dance period, the dance period. It is very much.
He needed a new swimming pool, so he wrote an album.
Right, and there's some really good stuff he did in the 80s, and I think that this is among some of the better stuff, at least a couple of the tracks. And then the other song I think is particularly lovely is "Within You," which is the song that is performed in the shot with all of the stairs, where he's like walking around her and above her, and she's trying to get to Toby. And those were songs later in the film that weren't quite as synth heavy and quite as 80s, and they were more like ballady in a really weird way, but they're very beautiful songs actually. David, have you been a Bowie fan before? Is this or is he someone that you don't really listen to?
I mean, how can I not be a Bowie fan, as a human being? Which, people don't like David Bowie. That's perfectly fine. I'm not, man, if I'm on a scale of like 1 to Brett, I'm probably nowhere near the Brett level.
Are we talking about Labyrinth fandom or Bowie fandom?
Bowie fandom.
Okay, yeah.
I do enjoy David Bowie, and the music did stick out as very 80s for me. And not, this movie itself is very 80s in so many ways. And that's not always a bad thing. It definitely works very well for the film, and I could see how I would not mind listening to that soundtrack at a later date. But for me personally, nothing stuck out from it as exceptional.
Yeah, I think that's probably very fair. I wouldn't say it's exceptional either. I just think it fits really well within its context.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I will say is that if you're a Bowie collector like I am, and you have a copy of Bowie's Labyrinth soundtrack on vinyl, hold on to that. They're very valuable, believe it or not. Very hard to find. I have yet to find one, and because they didn't press a whole lot of them. But so
keep my eyes open at the next yard sale.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's one you could eBay off or eBay to me, and and they're worth a lot. But in any case,
$1,000.
Oh no, more like 80, which is a lot for a vinyl pressed in 1986. But in any case, I think the music. What do you think of the music overall, Nicole?
Overall, I really enjoyed it. I'm with you on the 2 best songs in the movie. I absolutely love As the World Falls Down, and I love the Within You. It's almost a Springsteen, spoken when they're in the Escher chamber, call it. They're both gorgeous, and they're both meaningful if you listen to the lyrics. As the world falls down, I think you could interpret it 2 ways. It's either going through love and it's gonna suck, but I'll be here for you, I'll be waiting, or it could be we're gonna be together and it's gonna suck, but I'm gonna be so devoted to you. So, everything I've done for you. That's sort of repeated in their final confrontation, where he talks about all the things he's been for her and how exhausted he is by living up to her expectations of him. So
I think that those 2 songs, in addition to being some of the stronger musical numbers in the film, are also 2 of the most compelling scenes. Because visually, what's going on in those scenes, there's a lot going on. So when the world falls down, the scene is them at the masquerade ball, which is weird, because the reason she gets to the masquerade ball is because he gets Hoggle to drug her.
Right.
But that aside,
it's very Alice in Wonderland.
It's very Bill Cosby, but
whoa!
No.
I was gonna say it's more just very classic fairy tale.
Yeah, that is a very fairy tale thing. Eat this, harmless
it's
piece.
Very
of
Snow White.
It just comes out. It's always come off as really creepy to me.
Especially like that dance thing.
It's Labyrinth.
It's an
like drawing
uneasy.
straight off a fairy tale.
Yeah,
Right.
This is a fairy tale through and through.
Sure.
Yeah, I will give you. It's an uneasy sequence. The dance sequence. It's definitely an awakening of sensuality, and it's uneasy. He's 39, she's 15, and there's a lot of hints of what's out there in the adult world. She has to fight her way through this world of. She recognizes them as people, but doesn't understand them. Nothing they're saying is intelligible. They're doing things that are mysterious to her, or acting in ways that she doesn't understand. And it's interesting that they're the only, even though they're masked, they're the only other human characters in the movie, other than, Sarah, the only other adult humans in the movie, other than her parents and Jareth. So
Right.
I just thought it's interesting that this is where all the adults are, in this fantasy that he's building for her.
And visually, the way that scene kind of crumbles like glass is very fascinating. And I think, again, like I said, I think both of these songs have very interesting visuals, because you also have Within You, which I think is, to me, the most impressive scene in the film visually, is him walking around these sets of stairs and her constantly trying to get to Toby, and Toby is always out of reach and popping up in a different spot. It's just a very well shot scene. And before I throw it to you guys quickly in the chat, I want to mention two things. First of all, Brett, did you get the Labyrinth vinyl pop figures? No, but I literally am after this show. That is the greatest thing ever. Love it. And second of all, Within You is the first song my husband let me hear him sing. We still have a Labyrinth poster up in our house. It's the only movie poster to survive our maturing. I love it. Great. Keep that poster up and keep singing that song. Sorry, go ahead. What were you going to say, David?
That Escher scene, like the David Bowie parts of it, were very interesting. And visually, when he's taking steps and he starts on one platform and then is like on upside down on it, that's all really great. But then I feel like that was all the money they had for that scene, and they could have done some really interesting stuff there. But you never see anyone else at like a weird angle. It's all just David Bowie. So when you have Jennifer Connelly running around, she's still like right side up, like on a staircase. And I would have loved if that scene was more people upside down, or like having to jump from one platform or another and weird gravities happening. And it was a little like they showed you the potential of it at the beginning, but didn't follow through on it for me.
In a way, I think that scene works very well in that way, because it shows that David Bowie is manipulating a world around her, and she is somewhat helpless to walk around like he can. But Chelsea, what did you think of that scene?
Yeah, I initially had that same reaction of like wanting her doing the same like sort of like weird angles upside down, like walking sideways on walls more so. But like the more you think about it, I do think that works, because like as Brett said, Bowie's manipulating the world around her, and like he's the one with magic powers here. He's the one who's created this world, and she has very much been like the human sort of trapped in the goblin realm this entire time. So like her only being able to operate on the sort of like standard scale makes sense, because this isn't like she isn't able to like control the reality around her. She's only able to sort of live in the world as it is, whereas he's able to alter the shape of the world.
But I never got that he was changing the shape of the world around him. It's just that this area we're in, everything is weird, and you have to navigate it. And I don't know. I never got that it was like, because he has weird special powers, it's because this place is really weird, and I'm really weird. I know how to operate here normally. I don't know. I think it could have been really cool.
I don't know. I feel like the place is really weird because of him, but maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, because he does exercise some control over the labyrinth. What do we got in chat here? Margot says, what if it's just because he's the only real quote-unquote dream character? That's most certainly true. He is the master of this domain in a very fictitious, fantasy type fashion where he can really do whatever he wants there. That's why he can just randomly pop out of nowhere and be like, I'll go have this apple. And then he can pop out of nowhere again. He can be all like, you now have less time. And then he like zips out of nowhere. So he definitely does, exercise some kind of magical power type in the film. What else here in this chat? You guys know the ball is taking place in her music box, right? Yes, that's a great point, Katie, in our chat, is that almost everything that happens in this film is Easter egged throughout her room, which is great. And one of my favorite
it's kind of
scenes,
Wizard of Oz in that way. Things in her world have analogs in the other world.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite scenes in this film is when she goes down into kind of that giant, dump, and the crazy old hoarder lady,
The junk lady, yeah.
junk lady, brings her into her own room, and she's like, no, you have this and you have this, and she starts loading her up with her stuff. She starts trying to make her feel comfortable. She's saying, no, give up on your quest. You're home now. You don't have to worry about any of that. And that's kind of one of those moments where she has to determine whether or not she's going to persevere. And I love that scene because it is her metaphorical rejection of what is in that room. And then the room literally crumbles in.
I think that's what that scene wanted to be. For me, it didn't quite work. I get where it's coming from, and I'm not saying that just to be contrarian. It's because I had the thought the whole time of like, I see what they're trying to do here, but it's a little because she even like tries to leave initially. I don't want to get too much into it, but that was a very interesting scene. I thought you were going to be like the little worm guy was going to be your favorite scene because I love that little worm guy.
I love the
I do
little
love the little
If
worm
she had
guy.
gone the other way, it would have taken her straight to the castle.
Yes. Come in and have a spot of tea.
Yeah, the puppeteering in the
missus.
movie was fantastic.
Yes.
I watched a while ago. There was this documentary about Kevin Clash called "Being Elmo," I believe. And this was before his kind of fall from grace. But they talk about the I can't remember what they're called. The things that
Fireys.
Yeah, the fireys, and that part where it takes off its eyes and then it rolls them as dice and then throws them up in the air and catches them in its mouth was insanely difficult to accomplish with puppeteering. And it was almost impossible for them to do. That like they almost had to go to Jim Henson and be like, we can't do it. It's not a thing we can do. But they pulled it off.
The puppeteering in this film is beautiful, and this is a great segue into this. It's funny because the one scene I really, really do not like in this movie is that scene. I think it looks. I like some of the visuals of them popping out their heads and popping out their eyes and throwing their heads around, and all that's very neat to me. But the clearly green screen shot of her standing around where all of them are very 2D, and you can even see kind of the fuzz around where they're green screening it, has just never held up well to me. Everything else in the film looks rather good for its time, and I can still watch it today and be cool with it. And then that scene comes along, and every time I'm like, oh God, is this scene again?
Agreed, yeah. It also kind of derails the film temporarily.
It's a very odd scene.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
The
what did you think
other-
of that one, Chelsea?
I was going to say the other technical issue that I sort of have with the movie overall is there's really weird ADRing of lines.
Mm.
I don't know. I've seen a lot of movies from the time period because I was born in '88, but we had a VCR, so I saw a bunch of these movies as a youth. And I don't remember the dialogue being quite so obviously recorded afterwards a lot of it. But yeah, this scene did feel like a kind of weird little derail, and it didn't feel as much like part of her quest. It's just sort of oh, she's here now, and then she got out again. Okay, cool. Thanks,
It's a very
Ogle.
weird scene, and it's also a musical scene that is not centered around Bowie. And I think, and I think that my opinion on that is that was almost a mistake, because I do think that Bowie being the musical center of this film is one of the most interesting things about its music, and that weird little musical scene is just bizarre to me. But I will give credit to, I think, a lot of the other really fascinating aspects of the puppeteering. I wanted to talk briefly about Hoggle. Hoggle has always been one of my favorites. I love Hoggle. And fun fact,
I don't like Hoggle.
well, you like this, because I've always found this amusing. When they were transporting things around for this film, Hoggle got lost in baggage claim. He was on the carousel, just rotating around as Hoggle, until someone was like, oh, should probably get
You're
that.
telling me that expensive handmade puppet was not in a case of any kind, that he was just going around?
I don't know. I just know it was lost in baggage claim, and that
Okay.
people would see Hoggle. People could see Hoggle in some capacity rotating around the thing in the airport.
Oh my god.
Oh,
And-
I wrote these notes down. I never liked Hoggle. I was showing my age. I was 14 when I saw this movie in the theater.
Nicole, are you Jennifer Connelly? You have to tell me.
Can't say. But but I mean, the things that I didn't like about Hoggle, I was trying to nail it down this time because I've never liked that character. And not just because he like can't seem to make up his mind whether he wants to be a good guy or a bad guy, or get up the bravery to be a good guy. But he's so craggy and exaggerated that he's grotesque, but he's still human-looking enough to sort of invoke the uncanny valley. It's like almost perfectly human, but not quite. And I think that's part of what made him almost repulsive to me as a kid.
Sure, and
it's that we meet him while he's urinating. Some kids might have found that funny, but I found that upsetting at the time. When
also
I
had fart jokes. There were fart jokes.
Oh, of course there were fart jokes.
The entire Bog of Stench is a fart joke.
Yep.
But one thing I did want to mention about Hoggle, and I should also preface that my love for this movie surprisingly came in adulthood. I love this movie. A little bit, but because I watched this movie as a kid, terrified me. Really did not like it. And then I saw it as an adult when I was maybe like, when I was a teenager, probably 13, 14, 15, and I was like, wow, this is Bowie, and it's ridiculous and over the top, and fires on all of those practical effects cylinders I love, and that has grown more over the years the more I love David Bowie. I wouldn't love this film the way I did if it's not Bowie. But to go back to Hoggle, Hoggle is an interesting technological feat, I think, because the guy inside of Hoggle, because there was a little guy inside of Hoggle, and he could not see, and he also was not speaking the lines. All of these lines were ADR'd in later. So what he had to do, and also he couldn't really move the head or blink, because the way it worked is they had Hoggle set up on a remote control, and whenever Hoggle moved his head or blinked, or moved his mouth, they would have to control that all on the remote control. So what he had to do is he had to sit down for hours and hours and hours with the guy who was on the remote control, and they had to meticulously coordinate together to make sure that everything Hoggle was moving, saying, acting, his head, all lined up the way it was supposed to. And that has always struck me as really interesting, because Hoggle, he's very grotesque looking, I agree, but I think he looks pretty good. Hoggle is a cool looking character.
Oh, he's incredibly well made. Mm-hmm. But to me, it's the overall effect is kind of creepy.
So, puppeteering, as we can all agree, in this movie and films like Dark Crystal, and we've talked about other 80s films that have these practical effect puppets, some of that is what stands up the most in the test of time, and they're really great. So I'll throw over to Chelsea as our guest here. Why don't we see any of that these days?
Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. And it's weird because, we had that sort of interstitial period when you jump ahead to, 93, and we had, Jurassic Park come out, and there were a lot of puppets in that, but they, touched it over with digital effects. And then at some point we just sort of decided, oh, yeah, let's go all digital effects. And you got movies like the David Duchovny in Evolution, where you had these completely CGI monsters that looked like trash.
Yeah.
And there's this really long, horrible, dark period where we were going pure CGI, but it just looked really bad. And I don't know why we stood for that as a society.
I don't know why we stood for it. But,
I think the budget and craftsmanship involved in those things, obviously CGI requires a huge budget, but you can go back and change it really easily. You can touch things up and alter stuff with a great deal more efficacy. And when you've got puppets, dealing with lighting and shadow, even just to make the puppets look real, a lot of movies... God, okay, so completely unrelated movie, but in Alien, there was a lot of practical effects in that, but they had to light really carefully and keep things in shadow a lot of the time, so they actually looked scary, and so you couldn't tell that they just sort of slathered KY jelly all over the alien, so that it looked realistically slimy without being oh, this thing is just covered in goop. Okay, great. So
right.
Labyrinth also sort of relies on that lighting a little, and I wonder if it is partly just the expense of building those things, the difficulty of you guys touched on earlier, like how impossible it was to get that scene with the fireys where he like pulls out his eyes and like tosses them up, catches them in his mouth. Like, you're able to achieve moments like that a lot more easily. There's fewer limits when you move away from puppets, but you also do lose like a sense of groundedness.
Sure.
So I don't know.
No, those
You
are very good
lose that-
points.
You lose the what's the right word?
There's some authenticity to having a puppet in
There's
shot.
there's an authentic connection that you can make to it. There's a real affection that you can have. Like, you instantly, everybody loves the little worm with the English accent
Mhm.
because it's adorable.
Of course.
And it's real. It's there next to her. I'm sure they must have had a second one for the close-ups that they could, manipulate and make it talk properly. But,
Yeah.
it's that. There's one of my favorite moments in this movie is where they encounter the old man in the labyrinth, and he's wearing the hat that talks.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's the
Banjo-Kazooie.
bird. He's looking around and he's being snarky all the time. And at the end, he says, "It's so stimulating being your hat."
Yeah.
You know,
I
that
want
got
to,
a big laugh in the theater when we were watching that. And I instantly loved that thing.
it's great. I always as a gamer, it reminds me of Banjo-Kazooie. Looks exactly like it.
Yeah.
But I want to mention one thing, and then I also want to talk about a couple of the things we're getting in chat. I would mention that I think when J.J. Abrams was making The Force Awakens last year, one thing that he really attempted to stray away from was the heavy criticism of extensive CGI within the prequels. And that was probably a notable time in the last year where we have seen a good deal of puppeteering. A lot of the stuff on the set of Force Awakens was advanced puppeteering, especially in Maz Kanata's bar.
Mhm.
And and I think absolutely, my personal opinion is that it looks way better. I think he did right by Star Wars fans with that. But I do want to mention a couple things here in chat. Does anyone know who the baby grew up to be? Someone already found this in chat, but yeah, his name is Toby. He is now 30, and he is actually, well, nope, sorry, he would be 32 now because this article was published in 2014. Lives in Portland. He is a puppeteer in his own right. For the last 4 years, he's fabricated puppets, and he's done a couple different shows for Box Trolls, Paranorman, and some other things.
Oh, that's really cool.
There's a bunch of stuff that he has been doing in the film industry, so people should look him up. Just Google Toby, the baby from Labyrinth, grows up to be the Goblin King. In fact, I'll put it in our show notes. And then a couple other things in chat. Carrie is in chat and asked who the adorable little fox guy was. And that was Sir Didymus.
Sir Didymus is the best.
He was my favorite.
There is a
And
point
his
in that
steed
film-
Ambrosius.
Yes. And I was about to say, there's a point in the film where he's a steed. He rides Ambrosius, which is absolutely wonderful, especially because
Right.
Ambrosius is clearly a puppet in those scenes, and I think it's hilarious.
The whole battle scene where he's trying to charge against the entire army, and Ambrosius locks himself in a room. Oh, it's so great.
Yes.
Right.
It's great.
Well, and Ambrosius is the analog of Sarah's own dog in her world, her sheepdog, Merlin.
Yep. And
So-
and someone, Katie in chat, the door knockers. She loved those guys. I love those guys too. They're great, especially because they don't even really know. They're like, I don't know.
Right.
We don't even know how this
I'm
works.
the knocker.
Yeah.
Great scene. Great scene. And then someone else in chat. Puppets are more tangible. That is true. They are actually there. That's something we talked about earlier in the show. And then also, Movie Maniac. What is your favorite scene in Labyrinth? Katie in chat said it was the ballroom scene. My personal favorite scene is probably I love Dance Magic Dance, but I do think that the scene at the end with her and the stairs and Bowie moving around is really a great scene. What about you guys? Chelsea, what is your favorite scene in the film?
God, I'm gonna kind of just go off the dome. I feel like that scene, right towards the end, where they make it to the city, but before the castle, where that goblin army is chasing them around. But at the same time, as I was watching that, I was sort of this is dumb. So I don't know if that's my favorite.
I
that
actually-
They had
was not
live
insane.
cannonballs.
By the way, I think that city looks great. I love that city. I think it was such a cool looking little city. and I love the big giant, you know, golem type thing that you know, comes and attacks them, and that's where Hoggle comes out and saves them. Great scene. What about you, David? What was the scene you enjoyed?
I don't know, like, specifically. I think like the early parts of the labyrinth where stuff's turning around on her, like she was making the marks, and then there were little guys on the floor coming up and switching things around. Just seeing all the little random inhabitants of the labyrinth, and of course you got the classic "which door would he tell me to go through" scene. And yeah, I don't know if any specific scene, but any part when she was interacting with the inhabitants of this labyrinth, I enjoyed immensely.
And that's something that goes back to what Nicole mentioned at the top of the show, which is world building. And that, I think, one thing you can say for what Henson did with this film is that it feels like a world. When you see these inhabitants, and even the little things like the worm, like the little guys that switch the you know, the tiles on the floor, to the guys harassing what's our big wonderful oaf? What's his name? The big
Pluto.
Yeah, Pluto. And they're all harassing him, and they have like the little sticks with the little, you know, like
The little naked fanged koalas.
angry fetus things on them. I don't know. But all of that just feels very world building to me. Nicole, what was the scene you particularly enjoyed?
Oh gosh. Well, my favorite is the end sequence in the Escher chamber. But there are these little moments that I love. I mean, speaking of puppeteering, you know, Henson stripped it down to its absolute minimum in the scene with the helping hands that she falls into, where they're literally just hands moving.
And they're making
but
faces.
They get like 6 people together to build a face to do it. And those people must have been so contorted behind the backdrop, trying to get all their hands in the right orientation to work it. And they must, I can't imagine how long they had to rehearse to get that.
It's a great scene. And I'm going to do 2 more things, and then we're going to rewind down. We're running a little long, but that's okay. This is a special show. We got people in the chat. But the 2 things I do want to mention.
We'll never do Labyrinth again. Let's luxuriate in it.
Exactly. So, Movie Maniac, what are your thoughts on the other Jim Henson movie, The Dark Crystal? That is a comparison that people draw a lot. I really like The Dark Crystal. It doesn't have the Bowie factor for me, so I don't love it quite as much, but it fires on a lot of those cylinders for me. I especially like Frank Oz's involvement, who essentially co-directed it with him. And I love Frank Oz. So that was really cool. Who could replace Bowie? Oh, yeah, and then the other thing people are asking in the chat is, do you think they'd ever redo this film? That has been talked about. People have said, if we were to redo this film in Hollywood, who would replace Bowie? And I don't think it would be great to redo it. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on this, but I think you could have a Labyrinth 2 of some sort that brings in a really unique actor or actress that can take that Bowie mantle in a unique way. Off the top of my head, Lord, I don't know if she can act, but Bowie loved her. And she is a great person in that field. I'll do it with Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga's so talented.
Gaga is kind of the equivalent at this point,
right? Or just have Kanye in there. That was mentioned in chat.
She has,
Kanye.
If they remade this film with Kanye, I would see it all day.
No,
I would go see it over and over. Can you imagine this film with Kanye?
Like, even just reshoot the Goblin King parts with Kanye. I will pay money.
No, a key thing that's missing with Kanye that Bowie had in spades is humility.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's
Bowie was not an egotistical guy. He was up for having fun and doing, wacky things, or just hanging out and being relaxed, and did not have that sense of self-importance that Kanye seems to have.
Very true.
Right. I'm not talking about how we're going to improve on Bowie's performance. I'm talking about what's going to make this movie just a gigantic, unforgettable mess.
Well, Kanye is a wonderful, unforgettable mess.
That might work.
I would sincerely enjoy Kanye in that role. My other idea is Tilda Swinton.
Ooh, that's good. That could be really good. And some Margo in the chat mentioned Sia. Sia definitely has that aura to her, and she doesn't even have to be that great of an actor because you can't see her. So she can no facial expressions. You can just remove that entirely. Doesn't matter. So does it have to be a musician?
You just mentioned no Tilda Swinton. I think we just said that, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, Jack Black to make it more. Oh God, please don't do it, Jack Black.
So they did. It was mentioned earlier this year that somebody is writing a sequel, not a reboot, but there hasn't been any other news on that.
Yeah, and I think you have to be. I think you have to be careful with this because Labyrinth is a beautiful part of Bowie's legacy, and now that Bowie is gone, and one thing I do want to talk about, and I'll do it right now, very briefly, getting on the soapbox. Bowie is such a unique figure in this film, and I think now that Bowie is gone, and for me as a lifelong Bowie fan, I love Bowie so dearly. I can't even stress enough how heartbroken I was when he passed, especially so unexpectedly. But he was an artist till the very, very end. And I think that this film is a good reflection of some of his art during that period. And one thing I loved about him was that he worked and he worked and he worked and he worked, and literally until he was dead. And you can't say that for the vast majority of artists or people in general. His final album that came out in January came out 3 days before he died. It's called Black Star, and if no one has listened to it, you owe it to yourself to go listen to it, because it's essentially a jazz fusion record about dying. And that sounds depressing, but he's such a good songwriter that it doesn't feel depressing. And there's a music video that I would implore people to watch, and I'm going to put it in our show notes. It's his last video, and it's for a song called Lazarus. And what the song is essentially about is an artist reaching out with all of their being to produce something, and despite their body just pushing them back from doing it, their body and their soul and their mind are just pushing them back from doing it because he was fading. And in the music video, he comes out of a cupboard in kind of reverse motion and just starts reaching toward his desk to try to write things down, and the cupboard keeps jerking him back towards the cupboard, and you can tell that the cupboard is trying to bring him back from whence he came in a metaphorical sense, and he keeps jerking back forward in this painstaking, frustrating, uncomfortable manner, just direly writing his last work down. And that was Bowie showing us in his music and his video that this was him writing a song and writing an album with every ounce of his being as the cupboard was pulling him back. And then finally, once he's done with it, he kind of reverses back and kind of lets the cupboard take him. And then he kind of gets back into the cupboard and closes the door. And that's Bowie going back from whence Bowie came. And that is remarkable. That's so remarkable. My bias for Bowie aside, as a human, that is empowering.
Yeah, well, and I mean, music was the center of his life from a young age, and he really brought that to a lot of people, and it's a beautiful legacy. I think this film is a good addition to his legacy, both musically and as an actor. I mean, yeah, it's a little over the top, but that's what the role calls for, I think.
Sure.
And I have to say, as a 14-year-old seeing this movie, it's like I knew there was something compelling about Bowie, but I wasn't sure what it was. But I might want to see more of it, but I might be a little afraid of it. But so I was like, I was right on the same journey as Sarah there in terms of, it's like, oh, this guy's a lot older, but he's interesting. He's so dark, and I wonder if he could be better, but I don't know. And I'm drawn to him, and yet I pull back. And so that was me in the theater going like, ooh, and trying not to look at his tights and not succeeding. And it's just, this was Bowie in his prime. I think he was in his physical prime from this is my personal opinion, from 35 to 55. I think was his most beautiful time physically, and it's just he had a presence. It wasn't, he was a little skinny and he had the weird eyes, but he was fascinating and charismatic,
Yeah.
So,
and it's interesting you mentioned that being kind of his prime, because that was an era where he finally was able to get out of some of the heavy substance abuse that bogged him down during the Ziggy Stardust years, during the Berlin years. After the 80s came around and he had gotten out of, because what happened was he was living in Los Angeles, which at the time was the heroin capital of the world, the coke capital of the world. And he just got really bogged down in coke. And then he said, no, I'm going to go live right over by the wall in Berlin. And that's where he recorded the 3 Berlin albums. And then Berlin at that time was the heroin capital of the world. And then he got really bogged down in heroin. And it's a miracle Bowie lived as long as he did and ended up looking so great in those years. But that was him turning his life around and really feeling good as a person. And it's reflected in his music and his work, too. And most certainly in his presence on Labyrinth. So I would love to. Chelsea, do you have any kind of closing thoughts on Labyrinth?
God, I mean, like earlier we were sort of on that like sequel question, or like remake, or like who would you remake it with? And I don't really want a reboot or a sequel. Like obviously, like sort of a hallmark of like geek culture in general is like endless franchising and sequel making, but like sometimes I think things should just be allowed to stand on their own and be a singular work. And so even putting aside the like concept of Bowie's legacy, I really like the idea of this film just as a complete work as it is, without like any sort of sequel or remake being involved. I don't know.
I'm with you there. I would be open to one. I'm not one of those fans that would be, no, don't mess with my childhood. You're ruining my childhood. I'm not going to do that. It wasn't really my childhood, but
sure.
But I think it is a wonderful thing for it to be in its own perfect space and time, and I don't think it needs to be messed with. What do you think, David? Do you have any closing thoughts on Labyrinth?
It's, I get the appeal of it, and the weirdness and the puppeteering kind of does it for me, but it was okay overall.
That's perfectly fine. I'm glad that you could bring some of that devil's advocate, and it's always appreciated for anyone on the show. It's good to have multiple perspectives. What do you think, Nicole?
This was the first time I've rewatched it in a long time. And I'm just happy to see that outside of that the fiery sequence with the bad green screening, that outside of that, this film holds up so well. And
it does.
I think that's largely thanks to a lot of practical effects rather than reliance on digital effects. I'll note that the owl at the beginning during the opening credits, it looks like basic CG now, but I can tell you at the time we thought it was amazing. It was some of the smoothest and most beautiful computer rendering that had been seen up to that time. They worked really hard on it. And I think it still looks good. I think it looks stylized rather than realistic, but
Definitely.
it's still pretty to look at. And this whole movie is still pretty to look at, and I really enjoyed it. And it was really nice seeing Bowie being Bowie and otherworldly and charismatic and cool. And it was nice seeing, Jennifer Connelly being, nobody does wonder like her. Nobody gets that face as perfect as she does in this movie. So kudos
Definitely.
to her for that. And the puppeteering is amazing. It's just, that's all you can say. It's amazing. The Henson Company has the highest standards, and it shows.
Definitely. I agree with everything you said. And actually, Jennifer Connelly is one of those, few people who were introduced at a very young age into these films and ended up becoming a very successful actress in her own right. 2 of my personal favorite roles of her. I love her in Blood Diamond. I think she's great in that. I love any good journalistic portrayal. And I also love her in not Cinderella Man. I'm talking about the one with the other one with Russell Crowe, Suffering.
A Beautiful Mind. Yeah.
Great movie. Great movie. and she's a very talented actress. So yeah, this episode's for you, the Thin White Duke. We love you, and we're sad you're gone. Go listen to David Bowie after this episode. Go spin the Labyrinth soundtrack or anything else. Definitely Black Star. That's going to do it for us on this episode of Geek Cinema Society. Oh, by the way, in the chat right now, they're throwing around some ideas on what could be a sequel and some interesting ideas. Revisiting the old house and going to the old room where her mom grew up. So talking about Sarah's daughter. And then Margot in the chat says, I'm not sold on leaving Sarah behind. Seeing her handle being thrown back into the labyrinth numbers of years later could be an interesting subplot. So her not going back to the labyrinth until way later on, that could be really cool. The Goblin King's cousin takes and lures Sarah's child or children. Yeah, David Bowie it's not going to be as great as David Bowie abducting children. That's always just going to be the best abduction.
David Bowie into this. We have the technology.
We do have the technology.
Puppet David Bowie.
Yeah, but you could just have somebody, show them cracking open the other egg, and it's Tilda Swinton, his twin sister,
Guys, Puppet David Bowie. I'm writing this down.
Not puppet.
You're making ideas
We're
here.
going that far.
And then Carrie in the chat, true story, a friend of mine lived on the island with him and Iman. I gotta be entirely honest, does anyone know how to pronounce his wife's name? She seems like a lovely woman.
Iman.
Is it Iman or is it Iman?
Iman.
The more you know.
She's, I think, from Ethiopia originally.
Right on. Well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Geek Cinema Society. I'm going to go around the table real quick so you can find everybody, and we're going to have all this in the show notes as well. Chelsea, what do you got going on? What do you want to tell people about?
You can find me on Twitter at @AFlightyBroad. Just if you want to follow my thoughts and bad political jokes and so on. And I've got a Star Trek podcast, Long Trek Home. You can find all the info on that at longtrekhome.com.
Awesome. I would highly recommend checking that out. If you are a fan of exploring the X-Files here on our own network, they're doing something kind of similar, but with Star Trek. And David, what do you got going on?
Well, as always, I'm over at Heck Yeah Comics podcast, so heckyeahcomics.com or on podcasting apps. And you can follow me around the internet using the username DavLuz, that is DAVLUZ, so Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, and you can follow my progress in an attempt to build a puppet David Bowie, which is my new life mission. You updated there.
I love it. And Nicole, what about you?
You can reach me through the Blazing Caribou Studios website. You can reach me through, I run the Geek Cinema Society Facebook page. And you can follow my personal feed on Twitter under @YourWordWhiz. That's YOURWORDWHIZ.
Right on. And you always do very fantastic posts on those. Those are written by Nicole. She does a great job. Facebook.com/Geek Cinema Society. On Twitter @Geek Cinema SOC. Those are actually handled by David, and that's appreciated as well. They're always great. And my name is Brett Stewart. You can find me on BrettDavidStewart.com. On Twitter @RiversRuben. Ruben is RUBIN. There is no E anywhere in there. And find me on JukeboxPodcast.com, OurPoliticalEssay.com if you would like to listen to some political podcasting that will not frustrate you to a pulp, then we might be able to help you out on that. And finally, got a new record out. It'll be a little old, but about a month old by the time you guys hear this. But if you want to find that, it's called Tilting at Windmills for some cool new music. And you can find that on BrettDavidStewart.com. That's going to do it for myself, for Nicole, for David, and for our wonderful guest, Chelsea. We so appreciate you being on. And also, we really appreciate all of you being in the chat this evening. We've had some really fun people here in the chat, and I think this offered a fun dynamic to this show. Maybe it will cause us to do it a little more often because this was a lot of fun. So thanks so much for being here, everyone. We really appreciate it. And keep updated on our social networking. That's where we're going to let people know when we do live shows. Or if you're within Blazing Caribou, you'll know through other avenues. We've been telling him the live shows are great. They are great. I totally agree they're great, but it's good for us to have a very specific reason to do them. And I think this was a great reason because Labyrinth is a fun film and it's something we have talked about here on the show a whole bunch. So I don't know what the next quirk is going to be. What?
Brett, you're never allowed to mention Labyrinth again.
No, still going to mention it. But I don't know what the next quirk will be, but whatever it is, we'll do a fun live show. Thanks, everybody. Here's some outro music.
You've been listening to a Blazing Caribou Studios production. If you like this podcast and want to hear more like this, consider supporting the BCS Patreon at blazingcariboustudios.com. A special thanks to Pinto and the Bean for our company theme music. If you want to hear more, head on over to pintoandthebeanmusic.com, where you can check out this and other cool tracks.
From a shallow world, oh yeah, to sail a ship in another's.
All right. That's it, everybody. Thanks so much for being in the chat. We all really appreciate you being here.
I've got a special thing for the chat because I'm never going to use this story idea, but talking about puppeteering, if anybody wants to use this, here's a freebie. It's called The Puppet Lawyer. A guy who is a trained puppeteer, his puppet gets a law degree and is allowed to practice law, but the man himself is not. That's as far as I've gotten.
That's really good.
That's great. I'm cool with that.
Like
Thanks
it.
for. I'm going to bed crashing it. Yep. Thanks so much for being in the chat, Katie. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much, everyone. Hi, Mom. I'm probably there. So thanks again, Chelsea. We really appreciate you being on. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, we'll have you back
Yeah,
on the show
thanks for
again
coming on.
someday. And 'cause
Awesome.
we
I'll be
bring
looking.
guests back after a couple months. And so I'll get in contact with you. And of course, we'll put links to all this stuff. And when it goes out on social media, we'll tag you so you know.
Cool.
All right, everybody, I'm going to go get something to eat. I haven't eaten all day long. I need to
Oh,
go
no.
out. It's my friend's birthday. We're going to go get some food. So
Sounds good.
all of you have a wonderful evening. It's always a pleasure to hang out with all of you. And if anyone needs me, just hit me up on places that you can hit me up.
Adios, everyone.
All right, everyone have a great evening. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Night.